What's going on, my fellow rock and rollers? Don't forget to smash the bell notification icon to be notified every time I put out a new video on my channel. On March 15th, 1979, members of the old rock guard, represented by the Stephen Stills Band, and the new wave, represented by Elvis Costello and the Attractions, would meet at the Holiday Inn bar in Columbus, Ohio. Each group performed their own separate gigs that night, and what happened after that evening almost destroyed Elvis Costello's career. Stay tuned to find out the full story. Elvis Costello was on tour in 1979 supporting his third LP at the time titled Armed Forces. And following a gig that night, Costello was sitting at the local bar at the Holiday Inn when Stephen Stills and his band walked up. Up until that point in Costello's career, he was known for being pretty hostile towards both the press and some of his fans, as well as other bands. That night at the Holiday Inn, he was spewing venom, almost baiting members of Stephen Stills' entourage. Stephen Stills, for his part, would leave the bar early and retire to his room, but backing singer Bonnie Bramlett of Delaney and Bonnie fame stayed behind at the bar to chat with Costello. Costello was in a sour mood that night and made disparaging remarks about America and its musicians. When the topic of Americans versus the British came up, Costello reportedly stated, "American people are second-class white people compared to first-class English people." And the conversation would then turn to some of America's greatest musicians, including Ray Charles and James Brown. Costello reportedly described James Brown as a jive-arsed N-word and Ray Charles as a blind, ignorant N-word. Bramlett, who was shocked by the comments, backhanded Costello, knocking him off his bar stool, separating his shoulder. An all-out brawl would ensue that would be broken up when the bartender brought out a baseball bat. The following day, Costello was seen wearing his arm in a sling, and the problem for Costello was far from over. Bramlett took the story to the press with her version of events, and some suggested that Bramlett had a selfish motive, with some accusing her of merely trying to get her name out there again. When the story hit the presses about what Costello said about some of America's musicians, he was quickly labeled a racist. Any upward mobility that Costello had earned in his career up until that point had stalled. As you would expect, Costello was inundated by hundreds of death threats, and he was forced to call a hastily organized press conference in New York City to address the matter. As a room of journalists listened to Costello recount his version of events, he claimed he was intoxicated, tired from touring, and claimed he wasn't a racist. He would recount, "It became necessary for me to outrage these people with the most offensive and obnoxious remarks I could muster to bring the argument to a swift conclusion and rid myself of their presence." But he wouldn't offer an outright apology at the moment. And Ray Charles would be asked about Costello's comments in the press, but surprisingly Charles would brush it off and say, "Drunken talk isn't meant to be printed in the paper." And a few years after the incident, Costello would claim he declined an offer to meet Ray Charles due to his embarrassment over the incident. While Ray Charles may have written off his remarks as a one-time thing, American chapters of Rock Against Racism would picket Costello's concerts, and his ticket sales would plummet, and he was almost dropped by his record label. The whole irony of this entire incident is that Costello had played a Rock Against Racism show 1 year prior in Europe in 1978, and some of the pictures used by the picketers in America were from that gig. Following the tour, Costello would go home to Britain, and even like today, the public seemed to have a short memory. That's not to say everyone forgot about it. The incident had come up numerous times during interviews in the subsequent years, and in some interviews he preferred not to discuss the matter. In more recent interviews, he's been a little more reflective and forthcoming, revealing that he saw fellow musicians as enemies and reserved venom for them. During an interview with the Roots drummer Questlove, he would reveal, "It's upsetting because I can't explain how I got to even think you could be funny about something like that. I'm sorry, it's about time I said it out loud," Costello would conclude. And Costello would also address the controversy with his song Riot Act off his 1980 album Get Happy. The album was heavily influenced by soul music, and it seems obvious in the lyrics to Riot Act that he was having his final say on the matter. In his 2015 book Unfaithful Music and Disappearing Ink, Costello devoted an entire chapter to the incident and said the following, "You could say I had it coming. There was some beauty to the fact that it took a woman to knock me down. One thing became clear to me in time. That Ohio evening may very well have saved my sorry life. So what if my career was rolled back off the launching pad? Life eventually became a lot more interesting due to this failure to get into some undeserved and potentially fatal orbit," he concluded. That does it for today's video, guys. Thanks for watching. Let me know your thoughts on the incident below. And as always, if you have suggestions for future topics, let me know in the comment section. And if you guys want to support my channel, simply watch another video or go check us out on Patreon for some cool backstage perks. Take care.